Hi, my name is Deb, and this is my furry sidekick, Killer Kylee, and this is DG Reads. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to kick off a new vlog talking about books related to movies. There seems to be a bit of an influx, at least on my TBR, of books related to horror movies, thrillers related to movies, those types of things. And I have a few arcs on NetGalley I really need to get to, and a few more on my shelf that I would like to as well. And so I figured it would make a really fun vlog theme to film. Kylee costumes definitely can play into this one. The killer costume you just saw was one of her originals. It actually won the first year where I did a voting on Instagram for which of her costumes of the year was the favorite. So of course it had to make it in here. So starting with the books that I have on NetGalley, those are the ones that I kind of have a deadline to actually read and review with publication dates coming up. I have first up The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry. This is a gifted arc from Berkeley Publishing, and I have the audio from PRH Audio. This one's following a single mother who really loves horror movies, and she winds up working in the home of a legendary horror director. But when she's there, things start getting scary and something seems different, something seems odd, and she uncovers secrets. So I'm looking forward to that one. That's an author I've read and enjoyed before. Next up after that, I have Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay, and this one is an e-arc from William Morrow. And again, this is an author I've read from and enjoyed in the past. So this one is following the making of a movie. In 1993, a group spent weeks filming a horror movie, and only 3 clips have made it out to the public. Even so, it's become a bit of a cult classic. So they're doing a remake, and the one surviving cast member from the original is coming back to help with this remake, but apparently things get weird. And then the last one that I have on NetGalley is How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive by Craig DeLuey, and this is a gifted e-arc from Red Hook Books. This one sounds like it's a little bit more of a dark humor book about horror movies. A director is trying to film the absolute scariest movie, and he's filming this movie with an occult camera, and the description says it might be and probably is demonic. So that's another one that I am eager to get to. It's an author I've been wanting to read more from. And then for books that I actually have on my shelf, one of them is a very recent release. It just came out at the end of April, and that is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Jennifer Rose. This one is a Barnes & Noble edition that comes with the slipcover to make it look even more like a VHS tape. This one is following a group of siblings after the death of their mother, and they're looking through some home movies and find one where their father is covered in blood and there's a body, and their parents are making a pact to not tell anyone. And this one has me super intrigued to check it out. And then next up I have Curse of the Reaper by Brian McCauley, and this one is following an aging actor from an 80s horror franchise. And this is another movie that's getting a remake, but he's been cut out, he's been replaced. Even though the character is kind of in some ways apparently taking over his life. I'm looking forward to finding out more about that one. And then lastly, because we needed, you know, more of a challenge here, I've added on Night Film by Marisha Pessel, and this one doesn't look too bad until you realize it's 600 pages, and that's what you need when you have a TBR that's already 6 books long. This one is following the investigation, I believe, into the death of a director's daughter. It was ruled suicide, but the investigator's not convinced and looking into things. What's drew me to this one in particular, and it's been on my TBR for a while, is we do have some like mixed media elements in here, which I always enjoy in books, and hopefully that'll make the 600 pages go a little bit quicker, but that'll be the last one on the TBR. So I'm really excited about this one. I think Kylie and I might just sit down to a couple actual horror movies just to keep something interesting, take a little bit of a reading break in between books, and this should be a lot of fun. I'm happy to be taking you along for the ride. I'll be back once I have some thoughts, but in the meantime, maybe we'll show off a little more of Killer Kylee, because she's an adorable killer. No one would convict. Come on, Kylie, come! I am reading The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry, and I'm about 45% of the way through, so I wanted to just check in briefly. So we're following in Harry's perspective, and she's working at this home that belongs to this famous director, and she hasn't really gotten to know him very well, but as the book starts, he's starting to kind of get to know her a little bit and learn more about her son, invite her son over as well. Both Harry and her son are very interested in horror movies and learning about what this house's owner has to say about his history with movies. So there is some interest there just in the terms of movies and movie knowledge and all of that. The creepiness comes in where this man has collections from some of his films. The costumes and props and those types of things are collected in his home. And there's one item in particular that really is creeping Harry out. And it's always kind of had a weird scent that's always put her off a little bit. And now it seems like it's moving. So there's something creepy going on. I would say at this stage in the book, like, I'm interested in what's going to happen, but I'm not feeling super invested. I feel like I'm reading about something creepy, not necessarily feeling the creepiness. And I think there's just a lot of talk outside of the creepy elements that aren't necessarily drawing me in. At this point in the story, something has happened that's significant and it seems to be stirring things up, or it has more potential to create more drama. And so I'm hoping maybe in the second half I'll wind up getting sucked in more. So I will let you know once I find out if I do. I'm here to do a final update on The House That Horror Built, and I finished it up this morning. And unfortunately, this book just never really clicked for me. I think it had a lot of interesting ideas, and some of the twists that happened I didn't see coming, which I did appreciate that part of it, but there was just something about it. The atmosphere didn't really hit for me, and I think it should have. The house has a gothic setting, but I didn't quite feel that about it. And there were a few creepy moments here or there, but I think if the atmosphere had been built up a little bit more, that would have hit harder. I think the characters could have used a little more depth to them, a little more understanding of what their motivations were in some things. I think there were things that were questionable, where I wondered why they were doing things, and in the end, it made sense from a story perspective, but I don't know that it still necessarily made a ton of sense for a character perspective. I think there was a lot of backstory to the characters that we didn't necessarily need. Like, we get looks at Harry as a single struggling mother back in time and how she came to be here, and absolutely some good discussions about the struggles of being a single mother, about the struggles of going through rough financial times were had, but I don't know that they necessarily needed to be in this particular book when it's trying to build up tension or suspense. Some of that I think took away from it. So I think overall this one just was kind of meh for using a technical term there. I think I'm hopeful that the rest of these books will ramp things up from here. So I'm looking forward to continuing on and see what's next. I just realized I got to exactly 50% in Curse of the Reapers, so I figured it was a good time to check in. That said, the weather's not really ideal for filming. There may be some loud wind noises because it is sunny but extremely windy outside. Anyway, with this book, I'm having a good time with it so far. We're following our main character, Howard. He is the older actor who was the star, the Reaper of the franchise, and he still has a fan base. He's going to conventions, he's signing autographs, taking photos for money, doing all of that, but he's not really someone who's sought out for acting gigs anymore, and he's feeling a little bit lost, I think. With that, he's also struggling with some health or mental health issues in here, and that is coming into play with this new reboot of the movie. He's upset that he's being replaced for the movie, And then also realizing that the Reaper character is kind of taking him over in some ways. He's hearing the voice, he's doing things that he can't control or that he doesn't think he would normally do. I really appreciate that we see him reaching out for mental health help, and even though he's not maybe 100% open with the doctor he's reaching out to, I do appreciate seeing that. I don't think this book is going in a direction where mental health assistance or mental health meds are really going to be the solution, but it's still nice to see. We're also following Trevor, who is the younger actor who is being tasked with being the new Reaper in this remake. And he's had issues of his own. He is sober and still struggling with his sobriety. And we're also seeing the whole sobriety program come into play in this book as well. He's been told pretty much flat out that he was hired for this part not because of his acting abilities, but because he is someone who has made a big splash in the news and a lot of scandal around him, and that I think is very disheartening to him, and he's struggling as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how their stories wind up combining with this all and where it goes from here. It took a little bit to get going for me, but where we are now, it definitely is holding my attention and drawing me in, so I look forward to finishing it up. And I've finished movie book number 2, and I had a good time with this one. This isn't something I necessarily think will permanently live in my brain, but I had a lot of fun with it. I thought it was interesting the way the book played on the two different people playing the Reaper and the way the Reaper itself became its own character in the interplay between those two men and also within their own minds and their own weaknesses. And I thought there were some good discussions about sobriety, about mental health, about mental disabilities in general. And I wouldn't necessarily say it had a lot of scary moments, but it definitely had some moments of tension. It had some moments of gore, and overall it was fun. As you're reading the book, there are a few places where you get some scripts of the actual slasher movies, and I thought the way that that played into the book as a whole was really interesting as well. So overall, I had a really good time with this one, and it wound up being a 4-star from me. Hello again. It's been a very, very long day. Kylie and I had to get up extra early to take her into the vet this morning, and she was due for some of her vaccines, which was good to check off my to-do list, but the vet wound up being very late, so I sacrificed sleep for no real good reason. So I'm tired, and it's going to be an early bedtime type of night. But in the meantime, while I was at work today, I did make a good start on Home is Where the Bodies Are. And I was listening to the audiobook for this one, and I'm having a good time with it. I think there's a lot of messy family dynamics going on between the siblings. They're in very different places in their lives, and that adds some complications. And one of the siblings was actually present and taking care of their mother when their mother passed away and breathed her last and said her last words. And that also, I think there's some resentments there that she was the only one kind of stepping up and taking care of their mother. Their father has been missing from their lives, but now they've seen this video. They've seen the fact that their father is covered in blood. There's a body, there's a cover-up of some sort. This is someone that they know, and that is very intriguing. And what are they going to do about it? They have very different resources. They have very different risks if news comes out about this, and I'm interested to see where it goes. I think it's a fun read. I don't know that this is one that I'll remember 2 weeks from now all that well, but I'm having a really good time with it and looking forward to finishing it up definitely soon. Now though, I think it might be the type of night where I get in bed and pick up a movie of my own with Kylie. Kylie's actually sitting right here with me, and she is very sore after her shots, and it always takes her a day or two to kind of get back in her game. So she's just quietly napping here with me. And so I think both of us are going to want to just go ahead and get in bed and maybe actually pick up an actual horror movie. Maybe that'll be a good thing to watch right before bedtime. The sun's not even down, quite honestly, but I really could see myself falling asleep soon. So I will be back when I get back to doing some actual reading and give you another update. Okay, I'm ready to give you final thoughts on Home is Where the Bodies Are. I generally had a decent time with this. It was easy to read, it was easy to follow, it was a good multitasking type of thriller, and generally speaking, I liked it. I was not blown away with it. I didn't find the twists and turns to be that intriguing. I think it was a lot more domestic, sibling relationships, family history than I necessarily expected coming into it. But in the end, it was a pretty good time. I think it's one to pick up. It's one I would call a popcorn type of thriller where it's easy to read. I liked the audiobook for this one. Does have multiple narrators, and I thought that really helped keep things moving along. And as you switch back and forth between the different siblings, it helped kind of keep track of who was speaking at any given time. There were some twists and turns that I didn't expect in the way things wound up going, and I thought that was really well done. So in the end, this one got a 3.5 from me. Okay, I have an update on Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay, and this is a really hard book to kind of wrap my head around what I want to say about it. I've been struggling with it. Quite frankly, it's taken me about a week to get through the first half. Partially, I think, because I only have the ebook and therefore it has to be physically read, and I haven't necessarily been in the biggest physical reading mood. And also, it's just a book that's taken me a bit to kind of get into. So we're following the actor who played the thin kid in the original movie that was filmed years ago. The film never made it out into the public. A few clips got out, and it's developed a cult following. So he's become famous for this role that no one really ever saw him play. The way the book is told, I think, is partly why I'm struggling to get into it. We're bouncing back and forth quite a bit between the present day, where we're following him, and how he's getting kind of involved in this reboot of this project that never really fully existed. And then we're also following back in time when he was first cast by the people who wrote the film and was playing that role. And then we're also following the script. The actual script of the movie is in the book as well, and that's written by the people making the movie, and that's written in an interesting way where we're just kind of following along the action, and then there's also inserts of the people who created the film, their thoughts and what they want to achieve with what they're filming and all of that. The film itself is basically 3 teenagers bullying or injuring or torturing. It's very dark what they're doing to this thin kid, and it's not easy to read at times. It's meant, I think, to be very unsettling, and it definitely is. There's a big blurring of the lines between reality and what is happening in the movie, and I think that's really interesting how the author's playing with that. But at the same time, it's not something that I'm just sitting here eating up as I'm reading. So I am really interested to see where it's going. I am intrigued with that. It is a quick read when I can sit down and really focus on it. It took me almost a week to get through the first 25% because I kept putting it down for other reasons. But today I sat down and just binged 25% really quickly. It's not a long book. A lot of it is script, so those pages don't have a ton of text on it, but it's one that still is taking a little bit of time. It's very dark, and it's not something that I necessarily would sit down and read in one sitting, even if I could focus. So I'm going to take a little bit of a reading break this evening. I've got Kylie here who wants to play some fetch, but also decided that with all this reading about horror movies, maybe it would be time to actually watch a couple. So inspired by the fact that I'm reading Paul Tremblay right now, Kylie and I are going to sit down and watch Knock at the Cabin this evening and have some popcorn and just curl up on the couch and watch a movie. So that's the movie that was made based on his book, The Cabin at the End of the World. I read the book. I enjoyed the book a lot, so I've been wanting to get around to the movie, so this is a good excuse to do it. And while we're at it, I have some kettle corn for me, and I also bought some popcorn for Kylie. We haven't tried this before, but I thought it would be fun to get her a special treat while we're movie watching as well. So I will check back in when I have more Paul Tremblay thoughts. Okay, I am back with final thoughts on horror movie, and I did indeed watch Knock at the Cabin. It was the Paul Tremblay movie, and I really enjoyed it. It was interesting the way they made changes from the book, maybe pulled a few punches that I thought maybe were a little more impactful in the book, but I think what they did made sense for needing to make things a little more concrete in a visual format than in a book format. So that's beside the point. I also finished Horror Movie, the novel by Paul Tremblay, and this one I had a lot of really mixed feelings about. I think the way the story was told was really interesting. I think a lot of people probably will potentially like that about it because we're reading these scripts, we are jumping back and forth in time, and in the present it's somewhat being told as if it's a memoir that the main character is narrating for an audiobook. So there's a lot of ways where the storytelling is interesting. There are conflicting stories when we see different things in different time periods, and the main character's kind of memories of what happened and what is reality and what's not kind of get fuzzy in places as well. I liked some of that, but I think the way the story was being told, especially through the script, kind of felt like it was removing the reader from the equation a little bit. You were on the outside looking in, which I think with horror, I want to be a little bit more immersed in the story and to kind of feel it along with the characters rather than just be an observer. So this is one that it took me over a week to finish it. It took me about 10 days to read the whole thing, which is really unusual for me. And I think that kind of shows how I just wasn't as invested as I wanted to be in the book. I did check out the audiobook for this is going to have a very large cast. And so I think there's a lot of potential to make this a really interesting audiobook with a full cast. So I definitely would recommend checking that out because I think that might have helped my enjoyment if I had had that full cast audiobook experience versus just physically reading it on my Kindle. So in the end, this one just wasn't quite for me. I gave it a 2.5 stars. I liked some of the concepts. I liked the bleeding of reality and fiction together, but it just didn't hold my attention as much as it needed to get a higher rating. So that's it for that one, but I'm excited to keep reading on my horror movie book journey. I'm here with my midway check-in on Night Film, and so far I'm liking this one. Can't say that I'm loving it at this point. It's a little bit slower than I kind of anticipated for some reason, although the fact that the story takes 600 pages, I guess I probably should have guessed that it was going to be a little bit of a slower burn, but in any case, I am liking the story up to this point, and I'm about halfway through or just past halfway through according to the audiobook for this. The book has been very much investigative and it's very procedural in terms of how our main character is investigating and the people he draws into the investigation and what they're doing and why they're doing it. So it's a lot of those types of details that you would get in like a police procedural or a mystery type thing. There are some supernatural elements that have been hinted at, but it's very subtle to begin with, and it does have me intrigued to find out, are we going to go in a little bit of a more darker route? Is it going to be more mystery throughout? I don't know. Like I said, I did pick this up on audio from my library, and I am enjoying consuming it in that way as well. I do think having the actual physical copy definitely has added benefits to it. While most of the book, I would say, is very much a narrative, standard narrative type story, all of the additional elements do add to it, so I enjoy getting those. The audiobook does make an attempt at translating what's on page in here when it comes to the mixed media, but you don't get the level of description of what the images hold and that type of stuff. It's not really trying to translate it for someone who can't then look up the supplemental materials online and visibly look at them as well. So I definitely am looking forward to continuing on with this one. This is my primary audiobook at the moment, aside from a couple other things I need to be reading. So even though it is a rather long audio, I do think I should finish this up pretty quickly and be back to you with my final thoughts. I have now finished Night Film and have my final thoughts. I overall really enjoyed this one. I do feel like maybe it was a little longer than it needed to be. We get a lot of elements in this, and I think the author did really well at balancing them out and making them fit together and not feel like we were getting too much of one thing or another, because we've got domestic drama with kind of some custody issues, and we've got the mystery of this dead woman. We've got a lot of backstory about the director and his practices, which weren't always great, definitely weren't great. I'm underselling that, how bad some of the stuff he did was. And then there's the mix of paranormal and kind of a typical detective fiction kind of aspect. And I think all of those things really tied together well. And I think in general, it had some good atmosphere, some good ominous notes going on, and really enjoyed my time with this one. I do think there were a few places where it got slow for me, where I got easily distracted in a few places, especially when I was on audio. So it winds up being a 4 for me. Not a perfect book, but a really enjoyable one. All right, so I am approaching the halfway point in How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive by Craig DeLuise, so I wanted to give my initial thoughts while I was taking a reading break. So this one is following Max, who is a horror director and one who's getting a lot of attention and acclaim, but he's not happy with how his work is really going. He really wants to make true horror, and he hears audiences laughing and having fun with his movies, not being scared. Max finds out that there is a camera on the market, and this camera was the camera that filmed a notoriously true horror moment in Hollywood history, and it was horrible and gruesome and exactly the type of thing that Max is looking for. And he's determined to pick this camera up and use it to make a true horror movie. And probably the camera is possessed, unless it's just him, but probably it's the camera. So this one has taken a little while to kind of get going. I've been enjoying it. I've been enjoying the writing, but it is slow burn to start with. We're starting to get further into it. We're getting to the point where he's starting to take some steps towards making this movie. The cameras come into play, and I'm expecting it to pick up from here in the second half. Now, trigger warning, slight spoiler, but mostly I just feel the need to throw this out there. This is a horror book and there's a pet dog. So if you know how horror books tend to go, things don't always go well for pets, so go in prepared if that's a potential issue for you. That said, there's definitely just in general some gore. There's definitely some shocking moments. There is a lot of interest in seeing how this is going to go. So I'm having a good time with this, and I'm hoping to finish off this horror movie vlog with a big win. So fingers crossed, I'll be back soon with final thoughts. When there's a dog toy that you can possibly suit to a vlog theme, of course Kylie has to get spoiled. So she's now hanging out with her Hollywood toy. And really annoyed that I'm making her take pictures with it first before I let her actually play. Gotta take care of our stars and feed them on set. Never enough. Such the diva. I am here to give some final thoughts on how to make a horror movie and survive. So, in general, this was a very enjoyable read. It definitely picked up the action in the second half of the book. We got to the point where the main character is finally making this movie and using this possessed camera to do it. And this results in a series of very creative and interesting ways of killing people. And it's interesting how the camera really is the murder weapon in this case, and the way it plays out creates some interesting dynamics between the main characters in the book, the characters in the movie that he's filming, and all of that. I think the final sequence, all of these deaths, was really well done. I think using this camera that had control over everything made it very creative in the way that people could be killed off. I don't want to give spoilers, but there are ways of killing people that the author pulls off in here that you couldn't do without a paranormal, supernatural, something element adding to things. I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about the very end and the way, trying to think of a way to say it without spoilers, and it's really not possible. The discussions that happened in the end were interesting. The kind of way the characters got played with and some of the past characters got played with by the author and kind of the final sequence. That was an interesting way to go about it. And I didn't hate it. I don't know if I loved it necessarily. I think it dragged out a little bit longer than it needed to be at the very end. Overall, this was a book that at times I felt was slow, so I had a few issues with the pacing along the way, but still it was one that I enjoyed overall. It took me a while to finish it because I kept having to put it down for other reasons, but ultimately it was a book that I kept wanting to get back to. So all that said, I wound up giving this one a 3.5. That means that this is the end of my horror thriller movies vlog, and I had a lot of fun with this theme. It's one that's taken me a while to film over time. I got to watch a couple movies. I got to hang out with Kylie in a couple costumes. I had a lot of fun with all of that. And I wouldn't say that I have a new favorite book out of this entire set of books, but overall, for the most part, I did like most of them. So I'm counting that as a win, especially since I had a really rough reading period in the midst of filming this. So liking books is a good way to end things. So let me know in the comments below, have you read any of these? Have you enjoyed any of these? Do you have any of these on your TBR? Or let me know what actual horror movies are your favorites. Do you have any to recommend to me? Because I am kind of in the mood to watch some more. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you could hit that like button below, I would appreciate that as well. And subscribe if you're interested in more of my content. With that, I will leave this here and catch you in the next video.